All right. So thank you all for tuning in. Welcome to the second talk of the ALMA Recounts of Cosmic Conundrums series organized by the European ARC Network. I am Abhijit Borkar. I am a staff scientist at the Astronomical Institute of the Czech Academy of Sciences and a member of the Czech node of the European ALMA Regional Center. The ALMA Regional Center network consists of 7 nodes distributed throughout Europe, coordinated by ESO from Garching. The main goal being to maximize ALMA's scientific return for European users. This includes providing virtual or real-life user support to anyone that wants to use or get to know more about ALMA, needs support with the data calibration and analysis, and proposal preparation, archival science, and much more. It also includes the organization of talks like today to celebrate and promote the use of ALMA science in Europe and to simulate interaction and build new connections. In every talk of ALMA Recounts of Cosmic Conundrums series, a major astronomical question will be discussed. The speaker describes the context of the question and then focuses on the ALMA contribution to the field and contributions in the past and the future that we were looking forward to. The aim of this series is to highlight the unparalleled contribution of ALMA to the broader astronomical landscape and to provide an outlook towards the future that ALMA will bring, as well as collaboration with other telescopes. Today, we are delighted to have with us Dr. Eva Schinnerer, who will address the question of what is the coupling between molecular clouds, star formation, and stellar feedback. Dr. Schinnerer is a staff scientist at Max Planck Institute for Astronomy in Heidelberg, Germany. She completed her PhD from Max Planck Institute for Extraterrestrial Physics in Garching with the now Nobel laureate Reinhard Genzel. After which she worked at Caltech and also at NRAO as a Jansky postdoctorate fellow. Dr. Schinnerer is an expert in the study of star formation in galaxies. She has been part of many large collaborations and survey teams, many of which are familiar to the community, such as the Cosmos Survey, NUGA, Lemmings, Kingfish, and many other surveys. She's also the PI of the FANGS survey, which is the survey of nearby galaxies, for which ALMA is also a part, and it has provided some excellent, spectacular results. She has also won the prestigious EuroArc ERC Advanced Grant for her project on the physics of star formation. She's an expert in radio astronomy and continues to work with NRAO as an adjunct associate astronomer and has served on many ALMA advisory committees. I'm really looking forward to learning from her about star formation and stellar feedback in the galaxies from this talk. And with that, I will hand over the mic to her.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction. And also I would like to thank the organizers to select me to talk to you about what is the coupling between molecular cloud star formation and stellar feedback. So in the images here, you see basically from left to right, the molecular gas distribution in a nearby galaxy, the distribution of the stars, and in the middle and on the right-hand side, basically the ionized gas, which is the processed of the star formation and can be seen as feedback. So in order to, my interpretation of the question that was posed by the organizers is basically which physical processes control the formation of stars. And of the key processes in the star formation, one can consider what you see here on the left is basically gravity acting, and very obvious. Then is the turbulence, and that consists of the small scale turbulence basically within the gas, as well as large scale flows induced either by stellar structures such as spiral arms or bars, and also the overall motion of the gas in the galaxy due to the rotation, and also then basically the radiation from the stars itself, how they impact the gas as well. Also, for the purpose of addressing this question, it's important to consider which scales we are talking about. So if we think about star formation as a process that can be studied on megaparsec scales, it's basically looking at the galaxy populations and how their properties change and relate to star formation. You can go to scales of kiloparsec or below, where you basically are becoming very sensitive to variations in the galactic environment here, meaning things like the centers, bulges versus stellar bars or spiral arms to the disk environment. If you go even further down, you're starting to enter a regime where these studies are mostly done in our Milky Way. Is basically on parsec scales, where you can resolve individual clusters or the formation of individual star-forming clumps down to the end product being just a single star. So to understand this question, to dissect it, if you think about globally as a galaxy, you could, in the star formation process, especially in the sense of galaxy evolution, you would ask how much of the gas is accreted in a galaxy from the intergalactic medium, how it gets processed within the galaxy. At some point, then the galaxy ejects this gas again via outflows, either from active galactic nuclei, AGN, or star formation. And some of this gas might then again reach the halo of the galaxy or even be expelled again into the intergalactic medium. As I said, there are many things to consider within a galaxy. So for this part of the talk today, I would like to consider just the process of star formation, and that is basically the baryon cycling that happens within galaxies. So as I said, galaxy populations, you're very good to study how global properties of galaxies affect the star formation process. If you go and look within individual galaxies, you can see how local properties have an effect. And if you go on the scales of clusters, you will get access to the detailed physics on the very small scales. So coming back to, for the purpose of this talk, I will look at galaxies. So basically with a focus on how local properties or variations might impact the star formation process. So the baryon cycle, life cycle, you could basically think of if you take a small parcel out of a galaxy of a few hundred parsecs and look at how the baryon cycle proceeds. We can basically start with a cold diffuse atomic gas, it's shown here. And then as the gas cools, it condenses more, it becomes molecular, and the molecular gas might become self-gravitating. And once it is that, it basically will end up in the formation of a star or a star cluster. During the formation of a star or star cluster, there's already an interaction with its birth cloud of molecular gas, and via radiation, supernova, whatever other stellar ejecta, this molecular cloud is destroyed, becoming ionized gas. The ionized gas then at some point might cool again, become atomic, and this life cycle would start again. So as you can see in the bottom, there's a number of little icons for the different telescopes going from the radio up to the UV range. And in order to sample this full process, it is clear that one needs to basically combine observations across the cycle. So for the purpose of this talk, will focus on basically what happens from the molecular gas down to the stellar feedback. And questions that can be addressed by just looking at this part of the baryonic cycle is basically where, when, and how do stars form? How efficient is the star formation? Is it the same everywhere? How long does it take, or can it proceed? And what shuts off the star formation process? So the first thing is to ask, when you want to do that, where do you want to study this, and how do you want to study this coupling? And so for this, it's important to know that majority of stars form in main sequence of star-forming galaxies, and also that alpha is, as I'll show you, excellent in resolving the gas reservoir, and that, as you already saw, it is important to combine it with multi-wavelength data. So what is the ALMA revolution? So what you see here on the left-hand side is a very good example of a single dish map of the central roughly 10 kiloparsec of a nearby galaxy. And you see that their spiral arms are really well defined. And the resolution is about 500 parsec. So now if you increase that resolution by a factor of 10 in linear scale, you start to see that the spiral arms break up in little features. You see spurs emanating. You see that the interarm medium is not a smooth component, but also consists of smaller things. So the image on the right took about 170 hours at the Plateau de Beer interferometer. Back then, it was the most powerful interferometer to observe the molecular gas. And the same map now you can take in a 10th of the time with ALMA just for about 2 hours. So why is this decrease in time increase so important? So what you see here is a combination of molecular gas as observed by ALMA in brown to the star-forming regions, shown here in gold, and with stellar light distribution. So it tells you that you can compare now exquisitely where's molecular gas relative to star formation, relative to important galactic structures. So why did I say that we should study star formation in the main sequence of star-forming galaxies? So if you take the local population of galaxies and sort them by their star formation rate and stellar mass, you basically see that they form a fairly tight relation. So that basically, if you know the stellar mass of a galaxy, you can almost infer its star formation rate if it has any. And similarly, what is very interesting is that you look at the distribution of the star formation rate density per stellar mass, you'll see that there is a typical range of galaxy of stellar mass where the majority of stars are forming, and it hasn't evolved that much since basically the cosmic noon of the star formation rate. So since about redshift 3, it's always about the mass of our Milky Way. So with that in mind, we defined the physics at high angular resolution in nearby galaxy surveys, and the aim was to understand the interplay between the small scale physics of gas and star formation with galactic structure, but also have it in a context of galaxy evolution. So that's why we picked galaxies that were sitting on the star forming main sequence. Also galaxies that were roughly similar in mass to the Milky Way. So you see basically in the background, the local distribution of galaxies forming the sequence, and the blue points are the galaxies observed by ALMA. So this allows you, basically gives you a statistical sample that is large enough to study these processes. So the FANCS collaboration is fairly large, has been grown significantly over the 5 or 6 years since it has started. And if you recognize one of the names, please talk to these people. So basically the ALMA revolution is this atlas of 90 nearby galaxies that have all, where we resolve the molecular cloud population into individual constituents. It was a major effort to do that. It consisted of a large program augmented by pilot studies before and more projects afterwards. And just to appreciate, basically molecular gas distribution in a galaxy is not the same everywhere. So it ranges from smooth disks to flocculent spiral arms, well-defined spiral arms, and even bars plus spiral arms. So there's a huge variety in the morphology of molecular gas, similar to what we see in the nearby galaxies in the stellar light. So these observations of 90 galaxies has been complemented by observations of using the optical IFU spectrograph MUSE for a third of the sample, giving access to about 40,000 H2 regions. So excellent tracers to study recent star formation, but also investigate the feedback, plus about 80,000 stellar clusters coming from HST observations of about half the sample, with a fraction of them being very young stellar clusters. So just to highlight here, this is the distribution how star formation processes affect the ISM and show up in the ionized phase. And here are some images about the stellar light distribution coming from HST. So if you're interested in FANCS, I invite you to check out the webpage where you can also find the data products from these observational efforts, as well as all the papers that have related. So now let me jump to basically the molecular gas. And here I would like to basically make the point that the structure is set by a balance of internal and external pressure, and also that the global as well as the local galaxy properties matter. So it has been known since a while that basically the internal pressure of a molecular cloud that is set by its internal turbulence, and the external pressure put on the molecular gas or the clouds by a combination of the weight of the overall gas disk consisting of the atomic molecular component and the stellar disk, the weight, they put is in a balance. So basically varying a little bit, the external pressure will have an impact on the internal structure of the gas. And recently, Jai's son has shown that you need to, as particularly for the galaxies that are similar to the Milky Way, need to take into account also weight of the molecular clouds themselves. So how did Jai come to that conclusion? So he looked at the internal pressure of individual clouds observed at 120 parsec versus the inferred dynamical pressure in basically in parts of the disk of a size of 1 kiloparsec. And if you plot the internal external pressure as a ratio, you see here in the bottom that they all agree, but they are not in a one-to-one relation, but they appear to be overpressured, the molecular clouds. However, if you take into account that the clouds are partially self-gravitating, and that this is important, so you take this into account for the external pressure, you see that the two pressures agree and that they lie on a one-to-one line. So this is important to understand what sets off the molecular clouds. Knowing this, it's also becoming interesting to compare what is the typical molecular gas surface density or cloud surface density in galaxies. And if you look here again as the global star formation rate versus stellar mass, you see that more massive galaxies have higher gas surface densities, as well as there might be a trend from galaxies that are sitting below to those sitting above the star forming main sequence. It is also interesting to see that this cloud surface density shown here on the x-axis is much higher in the centers of galaxies, and particularly the centers of barred galaxies, which also appear to have higher turbulence in the gas. And also, maybe not as pronounced, having an offset, maybe on a factor of 2, you see variations that the gas surface density in spiral arms is about a factor of 2 higher than in interarms as well. Also, just moving to a more extreme example, if you go to an early type galaxies, this comes from the distance sample, you see that the distribution is way more smooth, and the authors basically conclude that it is the shear in the inner part of the galaxy that stabilizes the cloud against collapse, and therefore you have this more smooth appearance. And also the work by Teng et al. This is looking at the center of a galaxy, and you basically, it has a bar, so you see gas coming in towards the bar region here. And if you look at line ratios of 12CO to 13CO, you see that they vary, particularly in the part where the gas flows inward. And if you do an analysis of the line ratios and the conversion you would do, so that conversion factor, you see that it is very much lower there. So basically the inflow appears to lower the opacity of the line. So your tracer becomes no longer the same, all showing together that basically global and local galaxy properties matter when they modulate the molecular gas properties. However, overall, it is set by a balance of the internal and external pressure to first order. So moving on to the star formation. So the efficiency of clouds to form stars varies across galaxies and between galaxies, as well as stars do form fast. So in order to do that, we did a very simple experiment. We took maps of the CO emission as a tracer for molecular gas, combined it with maps of H-alpha narrowband imaging as a tracer for the star formation rate, and only asked which sidelines or pixels contain both tracers and which contain only one tracer. And if you plot that as a function of different resolution, so the top being 1.5 kiloparsecs down to 140 kiloparsecs, you see that if you observe galaxies at very low resolution, typically done with the single dish surveys, you see that most of the emission you have is in the overlap region, and you basically infer there it is. However, if you increase the resolution, you see that both molecular gas only or star formation rate only sidelines become more prominent, and that in the majority, it is the molecular gas, so the dark blue lines, that become more prominent. And this basically shows this kind of non-star forming gas is prominent. So this is done here on per sightline, but also if you do it per flux, the emission persists. However, it's not less strong because the most brightest regions in galaxies are the centers, as you will show. It also shows you that basically, if you want to study the coupling, you really need regions that are well below 500 parsecs, so pushing to 100 parsec resolution of clouds is important. Taking this scheme, Xian Pan has expanded that now using, instead of 8 galaxies, 49. And now we can start trends with global galaxy properties. And what you see here is that the non-star forming fraction of the gas is highest in the high mass galaxies and lowest in the lower mass galaxies in the sample range we sampled. The non-star forming, the star forming only shows the opposite trend. And it is very interesting that the fraction of where you have both molecular gas and star formation, that both sidelines basically stays constant across the stellar mass. So looking at these overlap sidelines where you have molecular gas and star formation, you basically see there is no trend with offset. It's roughly always the same. Offset from the main sequence, but also no trend with the Hubble type. As you see, the red points scatter the same as blue points. This picture changes when you look at the CO only fraction, where you see there's still a scatter across the main sequence. However, if you look at the color of the points, you'll see that the early type galaxies tend to have more molecular gas only sidelines versus the very late type or low mass galaxies that have a very low star fraction where you only see low lights, and there's no trend with the main sequence. Another way to look at this is also to check how the star forming gas, using that, how this matters in the gas star formation cycle. And in order to do so, you can basically define a parameter F scale, where you combine the CO only observations with the overlap regions and divide it by the star forming sidelines and the overlap regions. That should give you a scale factor, how quickly star formation proceeds. And you need to basically multiply that by a time scale here, how long you can see H alpha in the star forming region. So if you break this up in stellar mass spins, and you focus now on the dark points, you see that the scale factor is roughly the same as a function of radius and stellar mass. However, if you increase the resolution, ending up with the pink or magenta points, you see that the time scale becomes much longer in the more massive galaxies compared to the lower mass galaxies. And also, again, it only becomes resolved at a scale below 300 parsec. Moving now to study the galaxies as a function of, or the gas properties as a function of the environment. By here, you see basically a schematic of a nearby galaxy. You see in red its center, in green the stellar bar, in blue the spiral arms, and all the gray parts are different parts of the disk. These masks are basically defined on the S4G survey using the decomposition by Salo and Herrera and Doki. So if you do that and apply such a mask to the field of view where we have the data, you see basically area. You see that centers are basically not very prominent. Disks are covering a large fraction of the area analyzed. However, when most of molecular gas you can find between the centers in the bar spiral arms, there's the disk contributes less, and for star formation centers become even more prominent. So this now doing this more analytically using the molecular gas surface density, the star formation rate, surface density in the middle, and the depletion time on the right, you see that centers do stand out in having higher molecular gas surface densities and higher star formation rates. But interestingly, the ratio of the two, so the depletion time, is very similar. Variations between bar, spiral arms, interarms, disks are much less pronounced, though the individual distributions still vary. So basically means galaxy centers are very, very different compared to the rest of the other environments. And this becomes even more clear if you start to look at just the ratio of the depletion time of the center relative to the surrounding disk in barred galaxies versus unbarred galaxies. You see that The depletion time in the centers in both cases is slightly lower in the center. However, barred galaxies have a much larger variation than others in their central properties. So not only centers are different, they are particularly more different in barred galaxies. Another way to look at the star formation properties is basically to combine 3 samples for the star formation process. This has been done particularly in studies of galaxy populations using integrated properties, but now you can also do it resolved. So you combine the stellar mass, which basically should tell you how the molecular gas mass is related. Various molecular gas is expected to be an ingredient for the star formation rate and may be controlling it. So combining these 3 should allow to tell you which of the parameters the molecular gas mass might be more important for determining the resulting star formation rate. So the first one, star formation rate versus stellar mass, is the star forming main sequence. I already introduced you. Star formation rate versus molecular mass is the Kennigan-Schmidt relation that probably many of you have heard already. And molecular gas mass versus stellar mass has been recently introduced as molecular gas main sequence. So since we have very high resolution data for 18 nearby galaxies, we can make use of optical IFU data, giving us access to the star formation rate corrected for attenuation as well as stellar mass. We can study basically the evolution from 100 parsecs to 1 kiloparsec. For the purpose of a talk, I will only focus on the results obtained at about 100 parsec. So what you see here is a combination of these different scaling relations obtained at resolutions of a few hundred parsecs up to about a kiloparsec from various people. And the first thing that really surprised us was that these scaling relations are still recoverable at about 100 parsec, albeit with a larger scatter than at lower resolution. I note that the relation for the molecular gas main sequence is not roughly the same with the number in the literature. However, this will depend on how you treat your non-detections. And if you have more interest, I urge you to read the paper by Ismail. So the next thing is we were asking what is the galaxy to galaxy scatter between these different relations. So we calculated relations for each individual galaxy and compared it to see if there are trends with stellar mass or global star formation rate. Stellar mass is shown in color, star formation rate in the symbol size. And the first thing you note, is that the star formation, that there are no trends in color nor in symbol size. However, the thing that is very interesting is that the global galaxy to galaxy scatter is the lowest in the star formation rate versus a molecular mass, so the Kennigan-Schmidt relation shown in the middle. And we interpret that as basically that the star formation process itself is more homogeneous once it happens in the galaxy, but that the gas properties potentially depend on the stellar potential, as we've seen from other studies I showed you before. The other interesting thing is we could also, instead of looking at the galaxy to galaxy scatter, look at the scatter between different galactic environments. So we used the environmental masks I showed you from Miguel Carajeta just before. And what you see here again is that the variation in the Kennigan-Schmidt law showing in the middle is the smallest. And if you want to do it more quantitatively, we basically looked at the slope of each relation shown in the bottom panels. Here is alpha versus the offset from the black line, which is the line of using all galaxies together. And this is shown in the y-axis. And what you see here is that spiral arms are typically a buffer relation. The disks shown in purple usually are very close, tending to find the global relation, which makes sense. It's the largest fraction. Bars have a tendency to lie below relations, and centers do diverge more overall from the relations. And maybe just a digression for what would be possible as well if you start to look at galaxies that have more unusual patterns in star formation. So this is NGC 2276 at a distance of 36 megaparsecs. It shows very prominent star formation on one side and not much on the other side. However, if you start to look in its molecular gas distribution, which is much more smooth, and if you look at the ratio of the two, the depletion time, it's higher on the north on the southwestern side compared to the northeastern side. So you have a factor of 10 variation in a galaxy over only 8 kiloparsecs, which is highly unusual. So this work by Tomičić et al., they basically wanted to understand what is causing this scatter, making depletion times much shorter. And they propose as an explanation that it is a tidal interaction with a nearby neighbor that is basically shortening the depletion time, but also that has been proposed that ramp pressure is important. So here it basically shows that the youngest star-forming clouds are sitting at the outer edge of the galaxy, and that potentially this could explain the really short depletion times one sees in the outer side. If you're interested on how galaxy mergers might have an impact and shortening the depletion time, have a look at the paper by Sanchez Garcia and collaborators. So basically, to summarize again, the efficiencies of cloud to form stars varies between galaxies and within galaxies. And once stars are forming, it's short, and I also will come back to this again. So the stellar feedback is basically, there are two processes. It's becoming clear through the studies now that in simulations, people really think that it's a supernova feedback that is very important for destroying the gas reservoirs, particularly in simulations that don't reach the resolution to really sample all the physical processes and resolve them. So now it's becoming clear that even stellar feedback already before the supernova phase is important for destroying the molecular cloud and its properties. And the role of supernovae, I think currently is, from the observational side, more unclear. Though if it also might depend if you talk to galactic astronomers versus extragalactic. So how do you measure the lifetimes and therefore also get an access to the feedback timescales? So one way to do it is basically you focus on gas peaks and measure basically a ratio of the gas to stellar ratio or your star formation rate tracer. And then you do the opposite. You focus on a stellar peak or star formation rate peak and measure that ratio again. And basically, if you change the aperture size, at some point you get the galactic average. So that is kind of a depletion time. And before this, basically, you can use to interpret what is the cloud lifetime and get access to a number of other timescales that are important for the star formation process. So this basically methodology has been applied by Melanie Schwartz to 8 galaxies. And what you see here is basically the inference of the cloud lifetimes. And you see they range from about 10 million years to 30 million years. This number of a few 10 million years is consistent with other studies in the literature using different methods, applying it to single galaxies. The other thing what you see here in the dark red or maroon color is that the feedback timescale is very short, about 1 to 5 mega years. And that basically would give you an indication that it might be pre-supernova feedback that becomes more important. So in order to explore this further, Melanie, in her recent paper, she used this observed feedback timescale and checked if there's a trend with stellar mass. And indeed, the feedback timescale increases with stellar mass. There's no trend with metallicity, but there's a trend with cloud mass surface density, which is not unsurprising because, as you saw before, the average cloud mass surface density shows a trend with stellar mass. The very important result from this paper is that the feedback timescale, if you compare the observed one to theoretical predictions, you will find that typically the supernova timescale is too long to explain the observed inferred feedback timescale. So what you see here in black is the measured or inferred time scale, and in blue are different models. So what you see here in the dotted line is the supernova feedback, and in the dashed dot line is stellar winds. No, sorry, its dashed dot line is radiation pressure. The dashed line are stellar winds, and the blue line is photoionization. And so you see that it is basically the photoionization is always shorter, and all mechanisms combined give you basically the shaded area. So based on that, it seems that all mechanisms that relate to pre-supernovae are more important for destroying molecular clouds on average in galaxies. So there is some other line of research, and that is basically recent work that Liz Watkins is just doing. So she selected out of the Thanks sample 30 molecular gas superbubbles. So these are basically, I think the one in the bottom corner is the nicest example, are basically molecular cloud cavities that have a size of about 100 to about 300 parsec diameter. And only she's out of those, she picked the plus some significant clear kinematic signatures for expanding gas. And those, she focused on those 30 bubbles that had contained young stellar as clear young stellar associations. So if you look at the blue, you find most of them have something blue. They also have H2 regions, as you see in the pink, and then the orange is molecular gas. And she used basically two ways to infer the age of the superbubble. The one is the CO expansion velocity, and the other one is the age of the stellar association by doing SED fitting. So then she combines the cluster H inferred from the bubble H inferred from CO with the cluster H inferred from HST. You see that it's not exactly a one-to-one line. In the paper, she gives some explanations why this is. The other thing that is very interesting, if you assume that it's basically a pre-supernova age for these expanding bubbles, that is goes up to 3.5 mega years, and you compare this further, you see that the relation with the age inferences becomes better once you reach an age where supernovae could have contributed. Also, you see that you find more evidence for strong and weak supernova remnants being located within the bubbles. So this potentially, the conclusion of this paper is that pre-supernova feedback is important to start the bubbles, but in order to make them larger and persist more, you need supernovae. And just as a point here is these supernova bubbles are basically the most dense peaks, gas peaks that we can find in our galaxies. So coming here, I think the relation and coupling of the stellar feedback is still an open question. It seems that pre-supernova processes are important to understand what feedback is doing to a molecular gas and how it affects the baryon cycle or shuts off star formation. The role of supernovae is less clear, and I think we need more studies and doing this. However, it is also hard to do this in external galaxies. So I focused basically only on the main sequence of star-forming galaxies, and there are, of course, further parameters that one could consider. As I told you, global galaxy properties matter, and so it's a question of what does this large-scale environment do. I didn't touch upon galaxy centers, and I just want to highlight you how they are important, and I also didn't talk about chemistry, where ALMA could basically provide many powerful measurements. So what you see here is an image of the vertical survey of the Virgo galaxy led by Toby Brown. And you see here how the galaxies vary with distance from the cluster center, which is given by this dashed circle. And what you can do in galaxy centers, you expect that there are more interactions, maybe of tidal nature, so just harassment, or there might also be, you could think about merging galaxies. The other thing is also you could expect ramp pressure stripping. So an X-ray shows you basically the hot gas phase. And as the galaxies move in the galaxy cluster and through the phase, basically you expect that the hot gas has an impact on the cold gas content of a galaxy. And as an example here, I show one galaxy that was studied by Kramer et al. Oops, sorry. There you see that there is a really nice ridge of actually newly forming stars, which overlays very well with molecular gas content. And in order, what are the star formation properties and everything you can find in this paper. So what does the ramp pressure do to the star forming content of galaxies is another parameter that one should consider. I didn't talk about any large-scale outflows that are emerging from the central central regions of galaxies, which could be driven either by active galactic nuclei or star formation. So this is just one dynamical image, one sketch for the nearby galaxy of 1365, proposed by Gao et al. I also did not, I think studying centers would deserve a talk by itself. So centers often harbor very prominent starburst rings, and why and how star formation proceeds in these rings and how they don't is unclear. So if you focus on the top and left half, that is one scenario, whereas the bottom and the right is the second scenario on how star formation gas properties in these rings might infer what's the time evolution. This is a model proposed for NGC 613 by Sato et al. And for the closest nearby galaxies, one can start to resolve these starburst rings into its individual star-forming components. So these are superstar clusters studied at a resolution of half a parsec only. You now see that these clusters show P Cygni profiles with evidence for infall of these class, and this is work done by Levy et al., if you're interested. And the last I would like to highlight is basically the alchemy survey of NGC 253, which is a covering the molecular lines from 84 to 372 gigahertz almost contiguously. You see, due to the sensitivity and the proximity of NGC 253, that there is a hall of lines, and these lines probe the density structure, the relative abundance of the molecules. They allow you to assess the impact of shocks and the radiation field in changing the properties of molecular gas, and therefore have an excellent probe to study the relation between molecular gas star formation and also stellar feedback. So this is a sketch of the central region, just to give you in red and green. There is a prominent outflow from the starburst. There is an inner starburst ring region you see here, and this is a sketch of all the components that have been identified in relation to the star formation in this region. So this basically brings me to the end of my presentation, and about the coupling of molecular cloud star formation and stellar feedback, or another way to look at it is what's the process of star formation when you can basically look at its individual constituents. In order to study that, you need to reach the scales of the star forming units. So you need to resolve molecular clouds, H2 regions. And when you combine ALMA with multi-wavelength data, it is basically essential to get access to a time evolution. I hope what you will take away from the talk is that molecular gas is close to energy equipartition. However, that the global and local properties will matter in changing the individual, in introducing minor changes that basically that the global picture that molecular gas forms stars at in a given time scale starts to deviate. The star formation process itself is clumpy and usually inefficient. Not all gas forms cloud. Also, the global depletion time is long. However, if you look at individual clouds, it proceeds very fast. And the role of the feedback, I think, is still not unclear. I think it's becoming clear that pre-supernova feedback is important. However, the relative importances still need to be more studied and defined. And I would like to end here and also thank the ALMA Observatory as well as all the other observatories that helped to make thanks a success, and also for keeping up ALMA going over all the past years. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eva, for the excellent overview talk. This is really a fascinating topic, that there are so many different scales involved, from parsec scale to megaparsec scale, for understanding the star formation history of the galaxies and how the different scales are involved in sort of promoting star formation or hampering star formation. If people have questions, please do put them in the YouTube chat, and then we will take them from that. There is one question already. It says, thanks for the nice talk. I was interested by the plot showing the lifetime of various modes of feedback versus the observed lifetime of individual galaxies. What models go into this comparison, and how converged are the various models predicting these lifetimes? In other words, is the conclusion that pre-supernova feedback is as relevant, very model specific or general conclusions?
Okay, so I think most of the models that go in here are analytic prescriptions of the destruction times, how quickly they go. I refer the person to read the paper in detail. I don't remember the details. I think the discussion for the supernovae, I think the assumption was a average lifetime, peak time, then supernovae explode. So it wasn't set to the 3.6 mega years. So in that sense, these are statements across the average per galaxy, and the overall statement, the study contained 8 galaxies from about, with masses of about relative of M33 slightly higher. I think if you do that and come to the conclusion, they probably will persist, but if you do galaxy averages, you'll come to a similar conclusion. If, however, to be said that in order to understand it better, I think people might also want to study individual regions per galaxy and then do averages of those to end up with more robust statements on the relative importance. So that's why I think studying feedback, I think this has only started, and I think the Hang's dataset is one place to start, but also using other galaxies and thinking about smart ways on how to combine things.
Thank you so much. We have one more question. Will the FANG survey be extended to include H1 observations and study the link between neutral gas star formation and stellar feedback?
So we have an effort within FANGs where we are processing H1. So H1 observations consist typically from the VLA. I think about 37 galaxies have VLA observations coming from the D or C configuration, so giving you a resolution of about 15 arcsecond angular resolution. A couple of galaxies have higher resolution. They were covered by things. I think there are 4 or 5, no more, up to 10 galaxies have been observed by MeerKAT, some as part of the Mungus survey, as well as we have a small program and there's another program. So yes, the idea is indeed to also extend it to H1. We are slower on processing the H1 data, including it. Maybe I should also add that basically the MUSE part will get observed with JWST in the NIRCam and MIRI band. So at least there's a subset of 19 galaxies that will have everything from ALMA, MUSE, HST, and JWST.
That's awesome. Yeah, it will be really fantastic to have all the different wavelengths involved. I had one question. Since I am an AGN astronomer, it always makes me think of the galactic nuclei. With respect to the centers, I was really fascinated to see how much more star formation happens and how much more gas is available for star formation in the centers compared to the outside. But I think most of your galaxies are not AGN galaxies, so these are purely star-forming galaxies. So is there any, do you see any signatures or some kind of a feedback that is preventing the gas to eventually falling from the nuclear regions, which is like a sub-kiloparsec, reaching towards the parsec scales and reaching the central supermassive black hole and activating it? Do you see any signatures of that?
They haven't looked into that. And also, I mean, our resolution is about 100 parsec. And I think in order to do that study, you would need to increase the resolution, I think, by a factor of 10 or more. I think that is clear. I think there's, you mentioned NUGA before, there's basically the NUGA South survey. It's led by Françoise Combe and Santiago Garcia Barrio. I think they are pushing to understand this more. There are other efforts. I think Wisdom, they are targeting a larger garden variety of galaxies from nearby, no, from star forming up to AGN or more early types, I think those might be the better places to answer this question than thanks. I should say we do have a number of low luminosity AGN in the sample because we didn't select against them. And there was a recent paper by Sophia Stuber as part of her bachelor thesis, where she looked and searched for molecular outflows, and she found about 20 candidates, and they seem to appear only in the more massive galaxies. So,
okay, yeah, it will be really useful to look at the high resolution observations to see exactly what is preventing the gas from, as much as gas is available in the centers, what is sort of preventing it from reaching to the centers. So that will be really good to see. And there is one more question for you. It says, I was intrigued by the result of that the early type galaxies have the largest fraction of CO only sightlines. Is there a physical reason to why these galaxies have a higher fraction of sightlines with CO only not associated to star formation?
Yeah, I think it's this. So the one caveat to make here is that the number of sightlines is determined basically by the number of sightlines that contain either CO or molecular gas. So we're only counting sightlines that have emission. And therefore, the fraction, what you see here, is maybe only the part of a galaxy that has CO. If you combine this result with the result from the wisdom survey, I think there are also some studies, it becomes more clear. I'm trying to find the transparency. Where did I put it? Yes, it becomes more clear. So I think the abundance of molecular gas in early type galaxies that was already established by the wisdom survey. I think also in global parameters, they already showed that the depletion time for this gas is lower. I think observations are now really showing that the properties of molecular gas in these early type galaxies is very different from what we see in the typical star forming galaxies we have in FANGs. So the early types we have are going in the direction, and it goes into the direction of the interpretation is basically that since the gas is more confined to the centers in early type galaxies, it experiences more shear because you're still in the steep part of a rotation curve, and therefore the gas is not, it's not as easy for the gas to collapse and form stars and have star formation, and therefore this then makes sense why you see more gas. That would be one line of interpretation.
I see. That is really interesting, especially if we understand the formation of early type galaxies as forming from sort of merger sequences of multiple galaxies. That would bring quite a lot of gas in there, but it's sort of not leading to star formation.
Yeah, I think also if you look at this, I think this is also the morphological quenching that Marie Martic and some of these other papers also basically provide explanations why this could be.
Yeah, there is also one interesting question, which is, are you planning to have observations with JWST for some of your galaxies?
Yes, as I said, we have an approved treasury program. It's led by Janice Lee. And it will do, I forgot how many bands, but broadband imaging with NIRCam as well as MIRI. And the idea is to basically, with the NIRCam observations, to obtain excellent SEDs of the stellar clusters, which will help basically help us break the degeneracy between dust attenuation and age, in particular to identify the youngest clusters, the more embedded ones. The MIRI part will extend us, allowing us also to basically probe the hot dust and the pHs, so getting access to another gas phase. So this basically, if you think of the full star formation cycle, of a baryon cycle, basically will allow us to have a much finer resolution going from 2 to number 3, and also understand more how the stars impact the gas, even in their embedded phase.
Yeah, that will be really amazing. I don't see any more questions, but I had one last question to to just try to understand some of the things. So you mentioned that some of the deviation from the main sequence of several different parameters that could be explained by the larger scale environment and the cluster environment of the galaxies. Is that right for me to understand? That
I think deviations from the main sequence probably will go along with very clear variations in the properties of molecular gas. So if you think about, you become able to basically make the molecular gas more dense and improve its ability to start and to collapse. That basically via whatever turbulence. If you do a galaxy merger, you might be basically increase the density so high that the star formation happens more. That would be an explanation why the local lurks and U-lurks are sitting above. There's also the idea that basically the compression forces are higher. For example, there are the models by Florent, Renaud and others that could also help this. Similarly, you could think about if you're moving below the main sequence. So we talked about early types, then it could just be that you have molecular gas, but then you have basically molecular gas is in a place where it is basically no longer easy for it to collapse because of the shear, then it will suppress it. So in that sense, yes.
Thank you so much. That really, that makes me understand the differences a lot more.
Yeah.
So I don't see any more questions. So thank you so much for your excellent talk. And thank you everyone for your questions and attendance. The next ALMA recounts of cosmic conundrums will take place on February the 2nd at 2 p.m. Central European time. And the talk will be by Francesca Rizzo from the Dawn, addressing the questions of how does the dynamics of galaxies evolve over cosmic time. We would also like to bring to your attention the meeting of ALMA Young Astronomers, MPIA, which will take place between March 2nd to March 4th. And it will give early career scientists that focus on ALMA science the opportunity to present their results in a virtual meetings. The deadline to submit the abstracts is January 31st. And more information can be found on our EU ARC web pages and in the latest newsletter. If you have any questions about future events or would like to make use of the support offered by EU ARC network, please do not hesitate to submit a help desk ticket or contact your local nodes nearby directly. We look forward to seeing you soon and have a nice week. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you.